So let's start with the concept of what is a place. In our terms, it's critical, but it's also a meaningless construct. So when we talk about a place, this is a place. Does anyone know where this is? It's not very difficult. It's right here. This is the latitude and longitude of this room. But it's not actually the address of a place that makes it great. The social and economic value is actually created by the experience that these places offer to the people who use them, the extent to which they really understand the needs and the aspirations of end users. And in this regard, not all places are born equal. So it's incredibly important that we come to understand what it is that makes a great place. Because as an industry, increasingly we understand that places are all about people. Effectively, a place that doesn't have any people in it is just a space. This journey needed to start with what does the great Australian public actually believe to be the qualities of a great place. And interestingly, over the last 13 years, THI has actually been running, inadvertently, a Great Places Lab, with thanks to all those property sector and government sector partners that have encouraged us to go out and do primary engagement work with the community. So to assist with this research project, we aggregated all the data that we collected up from Brisbane, from Canberra, from Darwin, from Melbourne, from Newcastle, from Perth, from the Sunshine Coast and from Sydney over the last 13 years. And it meant that we had about 10,500 answers to questions about what are the great places in Australia and around the world? What are the features of those places that make them great to you? What is it that you don't like about places? And what are the missing gaps or the gaps in the place palette that you currently have to enjoy here, and how could we fill them? So this morning we're just going to give a really quick overview of that research and think about the ways in which we're going to use that to inform this piece of major work going forward, and whom else we might be able to engage with over the next couple of months. So one of the first things that we found out is that Australians are actually really able to talk about great places. They may not use the vocabulary or the language that we're accustomed to, but they're very literate about what makes a great place. And they're able to express their understanding of great places at any scale. So at one end of the scale, we've got cities, and at the other end of the scale, we've got specific rooms or parts of my garden and everything in between. But as we started to unpack the data, what we saw was there was a series of clusters of great places that were emerging, some families, if you like, around which we could organise our thinking. So escapes, at both ends of the scale, we've got natural escapes, which is really being able to be at one with big nature. So this is going way outside the city or the community limits and being able to understand where it was that we came from as a country. And then at the other end of the scale, we've got highly curated escapes. So you might actually say this was a big day out. This is the opportunity that you have to be at one with your family and friends. And then in the middle, we've got this urban palette that extends all the way through from personal places, intimate places that we know and love for ourselves, that we've created and have a high degree of mastery over, all the way through to those precincts in a CBD and everything in between. What's also quite interesting is that a number of the people who are involved in this kind of primary engagement work might not nominate a specific location. They might actually say, any place where you can get great coffee, any place where I can immediately find somewhere that I can withdraw to relax, or even any place that I actually feel welcome. So obviously, when we looked at the data, because we like to quantify things, we realised that the first example of a great place that people default to is cities. Cities are great places. That's good news for most of us, given this is a Future Cities Summit. But the interesting thing is, given that we didn't give them a big drop-down or a tick box that they could choose which cities out of a huge list they chose to nominate, the single city that was nominated most frequently, and maybe that's excused by the fact that we are actually sitting in Australia, was Melbourne. So Melbourne came out as a great place in more responses than any other individual location, address or type. But it was pretty quickly followed by New York, by Paris, by London, a little bit gutted to see that London was slightly behind Paris, Singapore, Sydney and Barcelona. And the reason that people like these big cities, despite the fact that they're often expensive and sometimes actually quite overwhelming, is they have this dynamism and this energy that extends throughout the day. They have institutional depth, lots of things going on that you can join in with. They're a little bit gritty. They're not always the cleanest or the safest, but they have a strong personality and a big brand cachet. But a different kind of city also emerged, so not referenced as frequently as the Big Seven, but Tokyo, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Vienna, and Kyoto and Berlin also came out as what we're liking to term now quintessential cities. What it was that members of the public liked about this was the idea that these cities were more like themselves than anywhere else. They were cities that actually strove to put their lifestyle and their culture on display. They didn't want to be like places that were somewhere else. And this was something that was extremely compelling to Australian audiences, and perhaps one lesson that we ought to take away. Big word cloud here. So we asked them next, what exactly are the qualities or characteristics of a great place that you like? And we let them nominate anything that they wanted to talk about. So you can see there the biggest letters obviously means the amount of times that people talked about it. People make great places. So any places that people go, people to watch, people to hang out with, places that you can go with people of your own, that was extremely popular. And food. As a nation, we obviously eat a lot. So lots of different references to places that you could buy and eat food together or by yourself. Beautiful. Beautiful places, highly subjective. But beauty was extremely important to people. But equally, so was a place being friendly. Being somewhere where they felt welcome, where they felt that they were actually part of the action and allowed to be. Places that you could get to easily, so transport, walkability, and they were also incredibly important. Places that were relaxing, where you had a range of things that you could do and things that were affordable. So perhaps none of these are particularly surprising, but what is interesting is the frequency with which these core concepts came up, whichever city of the world, whichever kind of audience segment we were talking to. Equally, however, people are very strong in their opinions about what they don't like and what they think totally detracts from a great place experience. So you can see their biggest word is transport. If this was a phrases rather than a word cloud, it would have said lack of transport. So transport as an enabler of great places is incredibly important. And it means that these environments are not car congested, their character and their experience is not dominated by traffic. So traffic was the number 2 thing. Too much traffic is not deemed to be a good thing. Lack of things to do in these places. So you get there, it has a big razzmatazz on arrival, but actually the experience dwindles pretty quickly. People, so lack of people, or being too expensive. Now, some of the text of that is incredibly small, so when you come back to hear the full report, a bit later on in the year, you'll be able to see what some of those more granular or fine details were. So these questions were asked at a range of scales and a range of parts of the city, but the answers that they gave were remarkably similar, suggesting that those qualities or essences of a great place, from the really big city scale to my back deck, actually have some continuity. So to that point, it seems important, really, even early in this research, that we start to give you as an industry some pointers. So 6 things that really came out of this research work as the key drivers or essential ingredients of a great place. The first is effortless, that the basic things just need to be there. It just needs to be clean and safe and easy to get to and easy to get around, not too antiseptic, so a little bit of grit and grunge is acceptable, but please don't make this hard for me. The second is that people may be becoming increasingly digital, but they still have analog hearts. So places need to be friendly and sociable. They need to emote warmth. They need to feel welcoming. They need to feel inclusive. They need to be places that you actually want to be and feel that you can engage in and participate with. Natural is a really big thing. So just because we're building some dense precinct in the centre of the city doesn't mean to say that we don't need to include biophilia. So grass, vistas, trees, tree canopy, shade, water in some form, incredibly important to people in engendering a great place experience. And then individual. There is this growing desire for the places that we create not to be like anywhere else. So the Australian public want you to take on board homegrown, local operators, independent, and not continually source the same kind of high street retailers or coffee shops. Alive, another word they use. They mean heaps of things to do. If they don't want to join in, they can choose to withdraw. But if there's nothing to do there and no opportunity to create their own activity, the place will be boring and they won't want to stay. So even if you think you're building a business district, increasingly in the future, they're looking for those things that can be done at lunchtime, after work, before work, to create a sense of enlivenment and community in that space, even if it's where you're coming to work. And then the last one is bloody good coffee. So don't even start out if you're not intending to produce caffeine to fuel the workforce. Phew. So, a few pointers to the future. When we started to talk to people about, do you have access to everything it is that you want in your place palette here in Australia? The answer was resoundingly not yet. And they saw some really big opportunity spaces, which we've just slotted here into our continuum. So you'll see on the left, new city signatures. So as people travel more and become more globally aware, they're starting to think about all those reinterpreted industrial city centre and fringe locations that other cities are turning into lifestyle precincts or reinterpreting workspaces. So they're seeing this opportunity for new city signatures to emerge that make our cities stand out, be more distinctive, and widen the diversity of places that we're able to visit throughout the week. And then the green to the right is more urban green. So this is picking up on the theme that actually weaving in fine-grained, small-scale, boutique fabric of green or blue into our projects and across the city is incredibly important, not just to the people who live there, but the people who work and who visit. Another interesting observation that came out of the research was that people talked about the fact that great places don't sit like plonk elements of architecture, that they actually need to be connected. And so the experience of walking from one great place to another great place, or catching public transport from one great place to another great place, has to be carefully thought through as well. So finally, a few pointers for emerging place themes. Let's pick up on this locally grown movement. It really does matter to people. So let's go out and find those local operators, many of whom may still be in their own garage or bedroom, and encourage them to come down and be part of our city-making future. Secondly, life after dark, that actually people are looking for a much longer, much more blended day. So they're hoping to find places to go after work through till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. And they don't necessarily mean nightlife, they just mean places to hang out safely that are not necessarily alcohol dominated in the evenings. Small gestures. So it's understanding that not all placemaking and great places happens at this monolithic scale, that every developer of every project in every part of the city can make small gestures that create a greater emotional attachment and resonance for those places. Imaginative beauty. So let's use our imagination more. Let's make sure that what we're creating is a more beautiful environment, even though that's a somewhat subjective concept.